Welcome to the Oxford Clay Pottery Podcast. I'm Catherine Tomlinson and I started an eco conscious pottery company called Oxford Clay. Now, Oxford Clay, I don't just make pottery, I also make books and courses for other potters who want to be more environmentally friendly in their pottery making. And that's what this podcast is all about. And I can't wait to get started. Let's go. Hello, welcome back to the Oxford Clay Pottery Podcast. I'm your host, Catherine Tomlinson, and in today's episode, we're going to be talking about 5 reasons that your clay might that you might not be able to center your clay when making pots on the pottery wheel. So, if this is the first you've heard of making pots on the pottery wheel, basically centering is the very first stage where you're basically attaching the pot to the wheel, pushing it down, and then you're centering the clay. So you're bringing the clay up and you're bringing the clay down to kind of create like the perfect situation for then you to be able to like make your pot from that base of clay. So centered clay is when it doesn't move at all. It's on the wheel, you can't see it moving, and that means it's like perfectly in the middle of the pottery wheel, and it's ready to go, and you're ready to make your beautiful pot. So the reason that you need centered clay is that if it's not centered, it can mean that you end up with like the pot just kind of has a wiggle in it, and then that just kind of gets worse and worse as you're trying to make your pot. And it can kind of end up with like one side being bigger than the other, and it just means that you can't make a sort of perfectly even pot, like which is maybe that's not what you want, but like yeah, it's generally easier to make pots if it's perfectly centered. So, right. The first thing to say is that this is going to sound really weird, but like basically, clay doesn't have to be perfectly centered before you start making a pot. So, um, like I used to spend absolutely hours trying to center clay, and sometimes I'd just be like, I can't center this piece of clay. And like the teacher, when I was learning in a pottery class to make pots on the potter's wheel, and she'd just come over and she'd just say like, you can just start making the pot, like if it's got a teeny weeny wiggle in it, it's okay. You can kind of sort that out basically when you're making the pot. Sometimes you can kind of center it better, even more when you're kind of like you say like the stage one when you're kind of opening the clay out. That's a good opportunity to kind of center at that point as well. So yeah, if it's not perfectly centered, that's okay. Don't let that like hold you back from like starting to make your pot. So okay, but there are 5 reasons why you might not be able to center your clay on the potter's wheel, and these are I've realized this from basically my experience not being able to center clay on the potter's wheel, and also the teacher kind of like various teachers over the course of my learning journey, kind of telling me different things and stuff. So let's get into the tips. Okay, so the first reason is that your clay might not be wedged enough. So some people call this kneading as well, but like in my pottery classes, we always used to call it wedging the clay, and it's when you're kneading it, wedging it before you make anything. So it's to kind of get the air bubbles out, and also to kind of that might be in the clay, also to kind of really align all those like clay particles, and mix it really well. So there might be bits where it's like slightly drier than the other parts, and you want that clay to be really well wedged before you make any pots on the potter's wheel. I'm just interrupting this episode to tell you about a totally free guide I've made just for you on how to make a stoneware pottery glaze. So, if you've never made a glaze before, or if you make loads of glazes and you just want a recipe, this guide is for you. It tells you everything you need to know, and it's available via the link in the show notes. Let's get on with the episode. And because if it's not, it'll be hard to center, but also you might get sort of, if there's ever so slightly more dryness or whatever in one part, that might make a thicker wall than the other part. It might be, easier to bring up the other parts, or so it can create inconsistencies basically in the kind of like thickness of your pot. So yeah, wedge your clay really well before you start making pottery, and it will just be so much easier. So when I say wedging clay really well, I'm kind of meaning maybe like spending maybe like 2 or 3 minutes wedging that clay. So yeah, maybe 3 4 minutes wedging the clay. I think you wedge it really really well. So it doesn't have to be ages, but it's just really just to make sure it's all really like properly mixed and stuff. Okay, so the second thing to say is that your arms might not be anchored on the side. So um, when I was learning in class, in a pottery class, the teacher would always be like, anchor your arms, because like you need a very strong stance with your arms to be able to center clay. Because that clay is so strong on the wheel, you need to have like a real kind of triangle really of strength in your body to be able to like bring the clay up and down and really get it right in the middle of the potter's wheel. So you can, like if you're learning on a sort of electric potter's wheel, and you have a basin, usually potter's wheels will have a kind of basin around them. Kick wheels, I've seen this as well, they have like a basin around them, and you can use that basin to kind of, they collect all the kind of clay slurry kind of coming off, the slip coming off. Use that basin as your anchor, and then you can create that really strong stance on the clay. So anchor your arms is the second tip. um, the third tip is that it might be the reason you might not be able to center the clay is you might not be using enough water on the clay. Um, so if you don't have enough water between your hand and on the actual clay, it can kind of drag, and it can kind of drag it off center. So you might be doing a great job of centering, but then it just gets a bit dry and drags it off, off that center point. So water, 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 anchoring your arms, water. That's what the teacher would say. Water, water, water. So it's like, if in doubt, add some water, and you can always clean off that clay slurry afterwards, because it will kind of start creating a kind of slip effect. But if in doubt, just add more water. You can always sponge it away after. Um, and the fourth reason is that your wheel might not be going fast enough. So you need the wheel really at like the very maximum fast pace, fast setting to speed to be able to center clay. So at that point, you want it to be super super fast, and then as you're making your pot, you slow it right down, and it's because otherwise, if it's going too fast, it will kind of throw that pot off off center. So when you're centering clay, you want it to be really, really fast, because that's like, it enables you to move the clay easier when it's going really, really fast. So yeah, faster setting for your potter's wheel. And then the fifth reason is that you might be kind of knocking the clay off center as you're taking away your hands or something. So this is something that, maybe this is just me. I don't know, but like the one of the teachers I had once said to me, when you're centering it, but then when you're taking your hands away, you're kind of knocking that clay off center. So it was like the way I was sort of holding my hands and then like removing them was kind of knocking it off center. So that's just something that, like, if you tried all those other things and it's still not centering, it could be that, I don't know. That's what happened. That was what it was for me sometimes, or usually it was because I hadn't wedged the clay enough, to be honest. So um yeah, so I hope that's been helpful in terms of the reasons that your clay might not be centering properly on the potter's wheel. Not wedged enough, could be your arms aren't anchored enough, could be not enough water, the wheel isn't going fast enough, or you could be sort of randomly knocking the clay as you're taking your hands off to kind of get a sponge or something. So yeah, well, thank you so much for joining me on this episode. It's been really lovely talking to you about this, about the reasons your clay might not be centering, and yeah, wishing you very happy potting until the next episode, and I'll see you soon. Goodbye. Thank you so much for joining me on that episode. And if you want to find out more about eco-friendly pottery, head over to the Oxford Clay website, which is www.oxfordclay.co.uk. Can't wait to see you there.